Before we jump in, I'd also encourage you to follow the Plugged In Show wherever you get your podcasts. So take a minute to leave a review. That will help other people know what to expect. And obviously, if you're vouching for it, that means it's excellent, and that will encourage people to listen as well. Well, joining me for our weekly conversation today are Emily Clark, Kennedy Unthank, and Jonathan McKee. Hey, everyone.
Hello.
Hey.
Well, I thought since we were talking about Lord of the Rings today, it would be super fun to ask this question. If you could be one Lord of the Rings character, and whether that's in your imagination or in the book or in a new movie version, take your pick. Who would you want to be and why? Let's see if we all pick the same character. Hopefully we won't.
Well, I think the obvious answer is Shelob, the spider. No. I would definitely,
that is not the direction I expected this conversation to go.
Yeah.
I would definitely probably choose Sam.
I like definitely probably.
Yeah.
Definitely probably.
I just relate to him so much.
Yeah.
He's there for the ride. He's helping along. He's not the main character, but he's super important. And I feel like a lot of people forget about him, even though Tolkien even said the real hero of the story is Sam.
I agree.
And I don't mean to put myself into that, but I really resonate with his character.
Well,
Yeah,
since you're the real hero of the story, I guess we're done with this question, right? No, Emily.
Yeah.
You have perhaps fewer choices unless you want to,
Okay, so
project yourself into a non-traditional
No,
role.
I am going to project myself into a non-traditional role because growing up watching Lord of the Rings movies, I was obsessed with Legolas. I was and it wasn't so when I was younger, it wasn't like I had a crush on him or anything. That didn't happen till later in life.
Right.
But I wanted to be an elf so much, but I didn't want to be like Arwen or Galadriel. I wanted to be the one firing the arrows, using those knives,
Oh, yeah.
It was so cool. So yeah, I'm going to say Legolas.
So Legolas. We could call you Legolina. Or
Legolas.
I like that one.
I love
Honestly,
that.
I feel like we
here.
can just call it now because nothing's going to be better.
Have you
than
seen
that. Jonathan?
the Lego
That's awesome.
Legolas?
Well, I guess
meme?
it's which
Legolas,
character
Lego,
should
Legolas,
you
and his
be? I'm
Legolas.
sure
Don't
I'm
overthink
probably
it. Don't overthink it.
Yeah, I'm probably the Hobbit who was cleaning his ear and looked at it, but no, I think I'm, who would I want to be? I mean, I want to be Strider. But Vigo nailed it so much, and every time I watch it, he's just definitely my favorite, and I'm like, oh, that's awesome. And as cool as Legolas was, especially when he did that one-arm grab, mount the horse thing, that was pretty cool. But
Defies the
Vigo,
laws of
that
physics.
slow-mo scene where he busts through the doors, and he's just walking through, I was like, oh, yeah! You can't help but dream,
Right. Well, that was my pick, so I'll have to go in a different direction. I will project myself older and say Gandalf, because really...
Oh, there you go.
Gandalf, right? I would need to grow a beard. I would need to grow more hair. There are actually several reasons why it's not an obvious pick for me.
FBI guy.
But Gandalf was
of our neighborhood.
such a core character. And if you're a super nerd like I am, and you read the Silmarillion, and Kennedy, we'll get into this because I think we're gonna delve into the backstory of what happened before Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
You know that Gandalf is almost an angelic kind of character. There's not a clear god that's ever defined super clearly, but he's sort of out there, and then he has these agents that, what are they called? The Valar?
The Valar.
And Gandalf is one of those.
Well, Gandalf is a Maiar.
Yes.
Gandalf is a Maiar, my bad. So I've been out-nerded by Samwise the Wise.
Yeah.
All right.
Looking back on this, I'm like, oh, wait, I have to change my answer. I have to be Gimli, because I am Gimli.
Oh.
In all instances.
I actually thought about being Gimli, too.
Yeah.
I just want to give him credit.
Toss
We're
me.
good. We can keep going.
Don't tell the elf. All right. Well, I think that's a great segue into the first portion of our conversation today. We are going to talk about Rings of Power, which obviously is the new Amazon Lord of the Rings series.
About how he has
as I mentioned, they have
the
pretty
things
much
that
spared
happen
no
in wild
expense. With that kind of budget, I half
Right,
expected,
because in the
some sort of check in the
second
mail just
segment
for watching
for
it.
tomorrow's
But
show,
Kennedy,
the segment was 7
walk
minutes
us
long, and he made
into
3 of those jokes.
the first couple
and I was only
episodes
able to cut
of
one.
Lord of the
other
Rings,
thing I want
Rings
him
of
to stop
Power.
saying
What do
is
we
stick
need
the
to
landing.
know?
Yes.
This is a great
So the
place
Rings
to
of
stick the
Power, it
landing.
takes place
Yes.
during the Second
Just
Age.
say it's a great
And if you're
place
not
to
familiar
land.
with that, the major events of that include The major events of that include the creation of the Rings of Power and the One Ring. They also include the downfall of the kingdom of Numenor, and it finalizes with the last alliance between men and elves as they fight Sauron. If you've seen The Lord of the Rings, that's that very first battle that you see as
Where
Isildur
they cut his ring.
cuts off the
off.
finger.
Yeah.
That was a remarkably brief summary. So
Yes.
what else do we need to know?
Yeah.
Like, who are the main characters, and is there a main conflict here?
Yeah, so we've got a few. Some are created originals by Amazon. Others are from Tolkien's work, albeit they are put into situations that Tolkien never put them into.
Right.
Those two
Did they go to
include-
Starbucks?
Yes, unfortunately.
No, that's
prancing-
my show.
the
That's
prancing
House of the
bean.
Dragon.
Oh, yeah. That's House of the Dragon. Okay.
One of those characters is Galadriel,
Okay.
who her brother has died. That is canonical, by the way. But what is not canonical is that she decides to take up his story, which is to find out where Sauron has gone, where he and his elves, or where he and his orcs have gone. She's looking and she's looking. It's been 500 years or so. No one's seen an orc in a long time. And so everyone else believes, well, perhaps they just all died off. But Galadriel doesn't
Too
think
easy.
so.
Too easy.
As well as that, we also have Elrond, who is currently helping Celebrimbor create a giant...
Celebrimbor.
He's currently helping Celebrimbor create a giant forge, which presumably will be used to create the Rings of Power. If you know your Tolkien lore, you'll know that Celebrimbor was the one who created all those rings.
It's not Celebrimbor.
No, I'm sorry.
Darn it. All of these years.
Finally,
We've got to read
Yeah.
the
Celeborn,
appendices,
Celeborn.
Adam.
Maybe.
That's Galadriel's husband.
Maybe.
Wait.
Yeah.
Anyway,
speaking
more.
of
Wow, the
Galadriel's
nerd meter is
husband,
going off.
The nerd meter just broke.
The
Right?
the needle is so far to the right. I'm sorry.
I can't while
speaking
I'm
of
on board.
Galadriel's husband,
No, thank you.
Celeborn
I
actually does not
appreciate it. I
appear
appreciate
at
it,
all in this season.
Well,
At least in the first season.
Okay.
But anyways, we have two other characters to get to know. We have Nori Brandyfoot, who is a Harfoot, which, if you know what those are predecessors to the Hobbits.
Okay.
She finds a mysterious man who has literally fallen from the sky. And she's trying to help him kind of figure out, he can't really communicate, and so he's trying to figure out, well, what am I going to do with this man?
Okay.
And then finally, we have an elf named Arondir, and his storyline seems to be that he's attracted to this human named Bronwyn, and he and she, they like each other, but, elves and humans
Right.
haven't
It's
historically, at least in the Second Age, they haven't really had good romantic relationships yet. As well as that, they have discovered that some indications that the orcs may be rising.
So that is the overarching story. The two big controversies here were that people were messing with Tolkien's history and that it was going to be potentially more explicit than anything we've seen so far. So speak to both of those just a little bit. And then, from a plugged-in perspective, the second question might be more important.
Of course.
From a nerd perspective, the first question is the most important.
Yeah, so what it looks like, at least for the first two episodes, they're definitely taking some creative liberties with it. They're taking some main points that are definitely in Tolkien lore, but they're kind of expounding on them and they're changing them up a bit. Galadriel, if you've read anything about the Second Age, she doesn't really have too much to do. She's with her husband and her daughter. She's eventually given one of the Rings of Power, but other than that, she doesn't do too much in the Second Age. And this Amazon...
So there's a sort of empowerment theme here.
Essentially,
bringing
yeah.
the female characters to the fore.
Which we saw
I do
wonder because
with the Hobbit movies too. Obviously, we have
Yeah.
whole new characters created for that purpose.
Of course, and I do wonder because, like I said, Celeborn doesn't appear
is
whatsoever, and she's been married to him for over 600 years at this point.
There's no internet.
But
That would be a long sitcom
And
right
I'm
there.
connected to the Focus staff one.
in terms of the sexual content,
That's
so far in the first two episodes, we don't see too much.
Okay.
The most is
I might
the
be
man
able to
who
get
falls
you
from
on
the sky.
and internet.
He wears at the very start when they find him is
I'm gonna
kind of
reboot
a
her.
scrap of
This
cloth that is
happens
similar to what Gollum wears.
Okay. So it's like Terminator then.
I guess so. Yeah.
There we go.
I'm working hard on the dad
reference.
jokes today, so thank
There we
you.
go.
Thank you for the sympathy labs. Okay, so at least thus far, there might not be as much content
So
as
the-
it seemed like there might
the
be.
review
Is that a
they
fair
did of
statement for the
She-Hulk last
brief
week,
At least for the first two
for
episodes.
the first 2 episodes?
it felt weird to
Okay.
me. It
So
felt
I
like
want to shift gears and
they
I
were
want
trying
to
to
talk
say
a
that
little
the
bit about
feminist
House of the Dragon,
empowerment
and then
was
we're going to talk
working,
about
and it
just the
didn't
appeal of
sound to
these
me like it
shows
was. I haven't watched
in general.
it, but
Because even though they're
there's
different,
a
they're really,
YouTuber that Brent
in
has
some ways,
found
cut of the same kind of
who is
fantasy
just
plot.
a
So,
drunk
Yes.
Irish
Emily,
man
what do we
reviewing
need to know
TV
about
shows and
House of the
movies
Dragon? And this
and
is
telling them how
another
they should have written it
prequel,
better.
right? I mean, we're taking
Yeah.
a
And
successful
his
story and
assessment
saying
of
what
it
happened before
was
this, just like we are with
so good.
Rings of Power.
Yes, so House of the Dragon
Yes,
takes
how they
place
have
200
written this
years
is not
before
female
the events
empowerment,
of
it's
Game of
male,
Thrones.
you know,
And it's essentially about the
demasculination.
um
And then he told how they could have written it better.
sorry, I remember now. Okay, we're good. Sorry, I was
make
trying
it
to recall the
feminism
name.
and
Yeah.
It is
feminist
about
empowerment.
the
It's like,
House
Sir,
Targaryen,
you are
which
correct.
is where
So good.
Daenerys comes from. It's where the Mad King comes from. It's all the people with the white silvery hair. They all came from this house. But the 200 years previous to Game of Thrones, they were the powerhouse, like, in all of Westeros. So, and it was partially because they had like a dozen adult dragons under their command. So
Dragons.
yeah, everybody was kind of like, oh, maybe we don't mess with them. They will burn us alive or eat us or destroy us. So yeah, that's kind of why. And yeah, it's just all about, like, you know, the line of succession and stuff. It's everything you would expect from a Game of Thrones prequel.
Sorry.
Sanitize that
Everything
corner
you
of the
expect.
studio.
It's everything you would expect from a Game of Thrones prequel, including the content.
Okay, that was my next question. So,
Yeah.
jump
So
right in there.
we're doing the complete opposite of Lord of the Rings, where, you know, we're still have some questions there. Maybe it won't be so bad. Well, no, House of Dragon dives right into it in the first episode. You got sexposition, which is a term made popular by Game of Thrones, where
One word, right?
yes, and it's
Like
basically
exposition, only with an S on the front.
yeah, because basically very important,
That's a
you know,
good
dialogue is
clarification.
Happening during these
Yes.
very explicit scenes.
Is that-
So
not where
you
my
got
brain
the
went.
language is really bad. The violent, oh my gosh, like some of the violence in this, there were some triggering things just in the first episode.
Someone wrote
They
it on a
essentially
response
perform a
report the other day and
C-section
said,
on this
oh my
woman,
gosh, it's a curse word
and
you shouldn't
against
use it
her
on your
will.
shows.
And it is mortifying watching it. I was like, if you've ever had to, like, deliver a child who, you know, was in breach or something, this would probably traumatize you to watch. Like, if you've ever lost somebody to childbirth, this would definitely traumatize you. And it was gruesome, and I was shocked that they got away with it, you know?
Okay. Well, I think in this sense, House of the Dragon is pretty much exactly what we would have expected, right? Is
Yes, I mean, I'm telling it's like
House
Game
of
of
Dragons,
Thrones
not
now.
House of the
Game
Dragon.
of Thrones.
Oh, Game of Thrones. I love that. Well, hopefully, if either one of these shows are
Wait,
things
they
that
said
you
it
are
so many
interested in,
times.
this
Hold
gives
on.
you
This says how
sort of a plumb
it's
line
two
to
different
evaluate
things. Let me see.
where it's at and what you can expect. I think it's interesting that we have two
House of the
fantasy
Dragon.
series and
Okay.
franchises and huge ones, right? I mean, there are hundreds of millions of dollars at stake in these two shows debuting the same week. You got to figure somebody in a marketing department somewhere is getting whacked on the head. It's like, do we really want to do both of these at the same time? But for me, it raises the question, why are these shows and these series and these stories so popular? Like, what does it tap into in us that we want to watch them?
You know, I'm the kid who always loved a good fantasy tale. I still do to this day. And it's just, I honestly can't even explain it. It's the only genre of book I even bother reading anymore because I have tried branching out, and, like, other than, like, a few, like, spy thriller novels, I just can't get into other stuff. I am very niche in this department, you know? And I don't know why. I just love fantasy.
Okay.
Yeah, I think. Sorry,
That's
Jonathan can go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Jonathan. Look, should we do
I
it?
think I always
Sorry.
grew up. Should Jimmy go and just start?
Yeah,
Just go
no,
ahead.
sorry. I was
Okay.
thinking to whether we wanted Emily to say that last sentence again before you came in.
No, he's fine.
Okay.
I think when I grew up, I always loved fantasy stories, and I think my wife would say the same thing because one, it really you use your imagination when you're reading these books and you're reading about these characters, and there's this story of, man, boy, I am stumbling over my words. I don't usually do it. Let me just start from the beginning. I think for me growing up, the one reason I always loved fantasy stories is, first of all, you got this story of good versus evil, and then you have these very imaginative characters. And on the book, I remember imagining, what did this elf look like? And, what did this dragon look like? It's not characters you run into on the street in real life. So it was kind of fun to imagine and play out good versus evil in these imaginative tales. I think the interesting thing is that with the Lord of the Rings, you kind of have the good versus evil, and there's definitely scary, like orcs and that kind of stuff. But when you get to like Game of Thrones, you get such evil. It's like horrifying, like almost traumatizing, like walk away disturbed. And I'm sure the creators would say, well, this is like real life. I guess if you lived in a part of the world where you encountered this kind of absolute evil, horrifying murder, violence, this is terrible, the most terrible stuff, let's bring it to the screen. So I kind of like more the escape, and I don't mind good versus evil and the stories of good conquering evil. I don't think we necessarily need to be dragged through the mud in the midst of it.
Yeah, no, I think Jonathan's not actually. No, I think Jonathan's exactly right. I think it all comes down to the imagination factor. When I was growing up, I was reading a book series called 11 Thumps and the Gateway to Foo, and it was my favorite book series for a long time. And I remember distinctly, there's one character, he goes into this magical world, and there's this one character who is a sentient toothpick bent on like world domination or something. It's been such a long time, I can't remember. But it was such a
I'm still stuck on sentient toothpick.
Yeah, there was such a strange idea that I was like, this is interesting, and I think you get a lot of that with Tolkien and with Game of Thrones. But I think as well, in particular, I was speaking to Game of Thrones a bit, it builds on a lot of those biblical ideas. You've got a lot of characters who are these like allegorical representations of Jesus, and you have the ring, which is like this representation of sin, and you've got all this stuff that I think really tugs on your heartstrings, whether you believe in it or not. There's something there where you're just like, wow, I want this to succeed because, man, I really feel what these characters feel.
Yeah, well, and I think that there's a parallel of sorts between the spiritual ideas and the beliefs that we hold to and magic. And I think that's why it makes this idea of magic both appealing, and why I think Scripture talks about, we need to approach this subject with care, because as humans in the real world, we're not invited into using magic or using means to manipulate reality or, communicate with the dead. We see that in the Old Testament. And so we end up with this sort of, I think, ambivalent relationship to it. But I think you're right, Kennedy, in that a lot of these stories have a very spiritual kind of undertow of ideas and themes that we can tap into. And some of those are going to be redemptive and really resonate with what we believe. And yet some of them, like Game of Thrones, you get this nihilism, right? I mean, there's this deep sort of almost infatuation with how horrible the world can be. And I've read a number of interviews with George R.R. Martin, and he basically has said, and I'm paraphrasing, Tolkien's great, but it's too sanitized. It's not real. We need to do, what would this be like in the quote unquote real world? And I think for a lot of us, that may be more reality than we need or want. But these are stories that also appeal to us as kids, and they appeal to our kids. If we have, a child in our house, and that could be somebody who's really young or somebody moving into their teen years who has an interest in fantasy, how can we encourage that and yet guide that impulse at the same time?
I think one of the biggest temptations would be to overreact and talk about how we're never going to watch this filth. And I think and I've said this on this podcast before, I think one of the mistakes I made as my kids were growing up is very often I was so focused on blocking out the lies, I think I passed up great opportunities to talk about truth. And I think sometimes when we see some of these, temptations coming our kids' way, I think if we're grounded in the Word, and what I mean is just finding regular time as a family to get into the Word, and as we're reading that, hey, what does this mean? What's this look like for us? What's this look like today? They're going to come to a lot of these conclusions because they know what the truth is, and they know, what they should set their minds on as they're reading that. And that applies more than us having to say, hey, let me point out this filth over here. The more we point out the more we point out the truth, the more they're going to recognize the lie.
I love that.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. I think another thing is just, teaching your kids how to guard their hearts against this stuff. Obviously, there are some things where you're just going to be like, no, that's too dark, that's too grim, that's too much of a temptation, and I'm not going to deal with that at all. But there are some things, even if we're watching Lord of the Rings, there's some violence in there, and you have to deal with that, and you have to be like, okay, well, obviously I'm not going to go out and start slaying orcs, but but it's still something that you have to kind of talk about. It's like, why are they doing this? Why are they fighting for this cause? What is this about? Is it just because they have this bloodlust? Is there a alternate motive for both the free people and the orcs? So I think when you have those conversations, like Jonathan said, I mean, these things can often open up to really deep theological discussions that you may have never had the chance to get with your children before.
All right, Emily?
Just I think as maybe a last little piece of advice, if you really are worried and you're worried that your kids are going to get too immersed in the dark stuff too soon, try to guide them towards the things that maybe aren't quite as dark but are still fantastical. You have the Chronicles of Narnia. There's there are actually a lot of book series by Christian authors that are fantasy based, and then as they get older they can start working their way up to Lord of the Rings, and hopefully they'll never read Game of Thrones. I'm just going to say that. I really hope that. I haven't read it. I never will. It's a matter of principle for me because of how bad the show was. But, you can work your kids up to it. And, and you also have to consider that you start off with, a book. Then you watch a movie that brings that book to life. Then you play a video game that immerses you into that world and allows you to be one of the characters. Then, you go to there are conventions for this kind of stuff. There's LARPing, which is live action role playing. It can be a very fun experience. And I think you just almost have to just kind of, guide them and kind of see where they're at and just go with the flow of it almost, know?
Well, one of the things we did in our family, when my son was probably 6 or 7, I started reading novels to him, and we started with the Chronicles of Narnia, and he loved it. At night, instead of a kid's story, we would read a chapter or two from one of those books. And I didn't know it at the time, but it was one of the things that I feel like we accidentally got right, and there was no master plan. It just kind of happened. So we did Lord of the Rings, and then we did 7 or 8 Terry Brooks novels, which is pretty much a straight Lord of the Rings ripoff. The Shannara series in every way, shape, and form. And then I think we eventually, by the time he sort of aged out in his early teens and was like, Dad, I don't need you to read to me anymore at night. I think we read 27 novels together out loud.
For 2 weeks.
And one of the things that we were able to do was to ask, compare, and contrast questions. So if we would get into spiritual things, I would stop and say, well, how does this compare with what we believe? Is it similar? Is it different? Is it a little bit of both? Because a lot of it had, spiritual stuff and magic and themes. And once we got out of C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, it wasn't written from a Christian perspective. And I hope that modeled for him the ability to think critically about stuff. And we can do that with any kind of entertainment. And here at Plugged In, we are hoping to equip you with information to make the best decision you can for your family on the front end. Do we watch this? Do we not watch it? Do we read? Do we play this game? But we also hope to equip you to think in terms of worldview. What are the ideas here that are potentially influencing the way my child sees reality? And that we move from that stance of maybe avoiding a lot of it to having conversations about it, so that by the time they leave our protective nest and venture out into the world and perhaps begin LARPing themselves, as Emily said, they're equipped, right? They can think critically, they can think biblically. And I think in some ways, even though fantasy has problems at times that we need to avoid, there's a lot there that we can wrestle with that gives us a great entree into these spiritual themes. So I hope the conversation that we have had this morning has not only told you about these 2 new shows, but maybe helped you think in a bigger way about this genre, about its appeal, and about how you can navigate it in your family. So thanks, everyone.
That was good, but very long.
I know. I was watching the clock.
So let's make Hamster and Gretel short.
It should be short.
Awesome.
All right. Well, for our second segment this week, Kennedy, you have reviewed a new show
Sounds annoying.
Yes, I have.
called Hamster and Gretel. And is this just Phineas and Ferb reloaded? Because it's by the same guy who created Phineas and Ferb and kind of looks like it. Or is there something more going on here? What do we need to know?
No, so in Hamster and Gretel, it's about this girl and her hamster named Hamster.
Okay.
And
Kind of
this
like
girl,
Perry the Platypus.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. No, so Gretel and her hamster, they're given superpowers by this alien UFO that appears, and it just tells them, hey, use these for good, and then it takes off. Am I good to keep going?
Use these for good. Or whatever.
Yeah,
Whatever
use
they
these
say.
for good, and then it takes off.
Use these for good, and then it just takes off. Now, unfortunately, her older brother, Kevin, is there as well, and they don't give him any superpowers. So instead, he's kind of back at transporting his little sister around and kind of being the brains of the operation as she fights all of these wacky villains. And so, I mean, if you're trying to compare it to Phineas and Ferb, you'll see a lot of the animation style and a lot of the humor is very similar.
Okay.
But if Phineas and Ferb was more focused on like these inventions that these 2 boys make, this is more focused on the Perry the Platypus kind of side of things, where it's crime fighting and superheroes, and it's fun.
Okay. Anything so far that raises small or big red flags for you that parents would want to be aware of?
The only thing I could think of would possibly be the slapstick violence.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's a pretty fun show.
Okay. Well, thanks for telling us about Hamster and Gretel. And I know with so many options these days, it's good to have an occasional show that you can
probably
say,
be
well,
long enough
at
that
least
it's
as far as we can tell,
putting in the podcast.
this is one that you can probably enjoy as a family. So
Yeah.
thanks, Kennedy.
Of course.
Well, each week on the Plugged In Show, we like to do a little thing we call Pop Culture Connection. And our producer, Ashley. Hey, Ashley.
Hey, Adam.
She comes in with questions related to pop culture that give us an opportunity to put our pop culture brains on display as quickly as possible. So the goal of the game is to give as many answers as possible to Ashley's question in 30 seconds so that somebody can have bragging rights for the week and the rest of us can, have sackcloth and ashes or something like that. So anyway, I digress. Ashley, over to you.
All right.
I've always wanted to say that. Over to you, Ashley.
Nice, thank you. Kennedy, let's have you go first.
All right.
All right. We'll see what your question is here. Do you prefer a predictable movie or a plot twister, and why?
Oh, good
Typically, I prefer a plot twister, and the reason why is because, it subverts your expectations. However, I think recently, I'm more in favor of the predictable movie. And that reason is because a lot of these plot twisting movies, they're doing it for the sake of twisting the plot rather than because it's a good plot twist. And that really annoys me. It's not original. It's not fun. I think about The Last Jedi, where it just kept twisting it back and forth, and by the end I was just really annoyed. It's just like I have no idea where this is going and it's not fun.
Okay,
Very
he
good.
wins. Just for bringing up Last Jedi as a
Sure.
negative example. You
We're
win.
not gonna talk about that.
Nice. Well, I scored 4.
Yeah,
so
that's fine.
Good job.
They were really
I-
solid points, though.
They were.
I got my heart out
They
there.
were girthy
Yeah.
points.
That was good.
They had heft to them.
All right, Emily. Let's see what yours is here. I'm going to do a different one because that one's too similar to ones we've had recently. All right, Emily, let's see what yours is here. This is one that Kennedy has had before.
All right.
Who do you think is the best actor of all time and why?
I'm sorry. Oh my goodness.
25.
This is terrible.
23.
Do I really have to answer this? Ugh. All right. Oh my goodness.
Do you want me to help you?
No. Meryl Streep. She can play anything.
Meryl Streep,
She has played. She was in Mamma Mia. She was in. Oh my gosh, I can't even remember the name of it.
Into the Woods.
Yeah, thank you. That is actually what I was thinking of. She was. Yeah, I'm done. I'm sorry. That was terrible.
No, but Meryl Streep's a really excellent answer.
She can play
That's a
any.
really
Okay,
solid
there's
answer.
a quote from a TV show where the guy just goes, "Meryl Streep could play Batman and be the right choice."
That would be interesting.
I don't think that he was correct, but he was defending her position in The Devil
I'd
Wears
watch-
Prada.
I'd
and
watch
she
that.
did
Good thing
Batman.
Paul's.
I would watch that Batman too,
I
Jonathan.
totally watch that.
Absolutely.
So I counted 4 points in 10
Yeah.
seconds.
Ha!
So that's
Yeah.
really good.
Right, so if you
That was
extrapolate that, you would have had 12 if you'd have had Meryl
I
Streep from the
know,
get-go.
right?
But unfortunately, the game doesn't work that way.
That's right. That's right.
We can't count goals not scored.
All right, Jonathan,
Yep.
you are up. And your question is, which do you prefer, Mac or PC, and why?
Absolutely Mac, because it doesn't break like the PCs all the time. It can find my printer a lot better. It's got that cool little glowing apple. It's silver
No,
instead of
it
black. It actually plays well with others. It connects with my iPhone super well. It's reliable whenever I take it on the road with me. It lasts about 10 years longer than the PC. It is all the parts work together a lot better than the PC. It has one. Oh,
So loud.
Jonathan, you're
Now
so
that-
deceived, but great answers.
Can I request that question in a future podcast? Because I'm one of those rare people who is actually split between the
bilingual?
two
Oh, wow.
based on what I need it for.
Ambidextrous.
Wow.
So yeah, I
Okay, move
could
on.
give some really good
Move on.
answers to that.
Those
Don't
were
answer
great
the
answers,
question.
though, and I'm pretty sure I'm not going to have that many to whatever question Ashley gives me.
I got 10.
Yeah, no, that was
Yeah, now
you
that,
were
That was
on
great, Jonathan.
point today.
now that we've done a commercial for the Mac,
For-
we definitely move on.
Right?
You hear that, Apple?
That's right. Or buy a PC. Do the same thing for a third of the price.
All right, Adam, what is the craziest reality show you've ever seen, and what made it so silly?
Oh, the craziest reality show I ever saw was a show back in the early 2000s called Joe Millionaire. It was a fake reality show about a guy that women thought was a millionaire, and he was courting them, and he's totally poor. And so it was really fun because it took the bachelorette trope and turned it on its head, and you as the audience are in on it, but none of the contestants were. So
That's
it was the only dating show I have ever watched every episode of.
Nice, nice. Well, I got 3
Okay, well,
3 points for that one.
but I had to explain what the show was.
Of course, and thank you for doing that.
Qualitative. I felt
well,
good about my answer.
I now want to watch
Thank
the
you,
show.
Kennedy.
So I mean, you did a good
Yeah,
job.
exactly. Joe Millionaire.
All right, so Jonathan, you are our winner today. Congratulations.
It was well earned.
Yes, it was. You did excellent promoting
I think Kennedy
Apple.
was the winner.
No,
Quality.
Jonathan.
Quality.
No, we're just gonna. We're not
Quality.
handing out participation trophies today,
Thank you.
Jonathan. You are the winner. Good job. The
I
rest
want
of
your
us,
pity vote.
the rest of us, just need to try harder
Yeah.
and be faster.
Yeah,
Wow.
be faster. See, that's the problem. It's like I always come into this and I'm like, ugh.
You had 10 really good seconds though,
Ugh.
and I think that's not nothing.
I feel like it's like it takes my brain like that first 50 seconds just to process the question.
Yeah. Well, I hope you've had some. I hope you've had fun listening to us here at the Plugged In Show today. We like to think deeply. Obviously, we got our nerd on a little bit talking about Lord of the Rings, and hopefully we gave you some content that you can really think about in terms of your own choices and your family's choices. And if you enjoyed the show, tell your friends about us. Word of mouth is the best way to get the Plugged In Show out there. And you can also leave us a comment on Apple Podcasts or on whatever podcast player you use. We would also love to hear from you. Have you watched the first episode or second episode of the Lord of the Rings show? What did you think? You can connect with us on Facebook or Instagram, or just send us an email at team@thepluggedinshow.com. And if you want to learn more, be sure to check out our full reviews for each of these new shows at pluggedin.com. Well, thanks again for spending a portion of your day with us today. We appreciate that. We are thankful that you are a part of our listening audience, and we look forward to joining you again next week for another episode of The Plugged In Show.